The forest was sufficiently creepy. Marvin pulled his car along the side of the narrow mountain road and got out. It was deadly silent. No creature stirred in the darkness, and he saw no sign of civilization from where he stood. It was perfect. The more he could sell the idea of an isolated, eerie location, the better. From his experience, remote locations always made for better video engagement. People were more prone to click on titles like Old Haunted Cemetery in the Woods than they were on anything that had to do with an urban environment. It didn't matter what the subject matter was. There was something about being alone in the dark in some strange place where escape was not easily attained that scratched the itch for those who liked to be scared. And as a content creator who specialized in visiting such places in the middle of the night, Marvin was happy to provide the images, so long as the clicks kept coming. He locked the car and passed a flashlight beam over the tree line along the edge of the road. He spotted the barely used path 20 yards in front of his car and walked over to it. It was overgrown and nearly imperceptible, but it was clearly a trail. Unless there was another one nearby, he assumed this was where his GPS directed him. He took a breath and started into the forest. Marvin was looking for precisely the type of clickbaity place he had mused about earlier, a haunted cemetery deep in the woods. If the subreddit he had mined for information was true, he was looking for a small Civil War-era graveyard tucked away in the heart of the Nantahala National Forest. According to several posters who claimed to have visited the cemetery, it was relatively small with only a few dozen headstones in poor condition. Nature was making significant gains in reclaiming the land from the deceased, but some of the headstones were still legible, which made the trip worth it from a purely historical perspective. But crumbling gravestones weren't the reason Marvin trekked through the dark woods to find them. It was the supposed ghost of Emma Lou Young. Legend had it that young Emma, only 9 at the time, was killed when a stray .577 caliber round from an Enfield rifle struck her while she and her family were traveling from Chattanooga. Marvin did a little research into the claim, and the story appeared to track. The Nantahala National Forest was west of Chattanooga by 80 or so miles as the crow flies, and just 5 miles south of Chattanooga was the Chickamauga Battlefield Visitor Center, so the region clearly saw some action during the Civil War. It seemed that Emma and her family ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time during their travels. Marvin couldn't find much information regarding the family, but the idea that they transported Emma's body 80-plus miles back to what Marvin assumed was their home to bury her spoke volumes as to their commitment to put their daughter to rest on family land. And that's where the story got strange. Typically, tales of hauntings involved a person who died in or around the premises that they haunt, but the spirit of Emma Lou was rumored to appear at the cemetery, 80 miles from where she died. More than that, stories claim that she appears at the specific time of 11:07 p.m., which is when she was allegedly shot and killed. It was all very peculiar. Did her ghost remain with the body? And were there other spirits in the graveyard of other family members? And if not, why not? What made Emma Lou so special that she hung around? Marvin supposed it could have something to do with how she was extinguished from the world so abruptly and violently. Her ghost story was the first he'd come across that didn't involve an on-site death. But the strangest element of it was what allegedly happened to those who encountered her. Marvin read more than a few secondhand accounts from people who knew somebody who had heard it from a friend who had heard it from someone else. Words like insanity and madness were thrown around, with at least one person claiming that someone they knew went to the cemetery and never came home. It was all great lore, the kind of detail that made people lean in and want to know more. The final video should generate some decent clicks. Too bad it was all complete and utter first-class horse crap. Marvin trod over a semi-muddy trail that widened just a bit and reduced the number of branches he had to push out of his face. The moon vanished behind a thick canopy of puffy gray clouds, and he made sure to document all of it. For the journey was nearly as important as the reveal. At least that's what his analytics implied. He'd gotten so used to holding a camera at all times it started to feel like an extra appendage. Ghosts. He couldn't believe people actually believed in them. He'd been to dozens of alleged haunted places and had never seen one. Sure, there were noises and spooky shadows and things that got his heart racing, but he'd never seen a full-blown apparition. Why? Because ghosts weren't real. People believed in them because they wanted them to be real. They liked the idea that there was a tether to the other side, that loved ones who had passed were still around in some tangible way. Marvin theorized it made them feel less lonely in the universe, that there was an after when their time came. But for him, the idea of a ghost didn't make any sense. There were too many inexplicable rules. For example, why could people never see them, but cameras always seemed to have no trouble grabbing an image? What was so magical about a lens? And why were ghosts always relegated to structures? The spookier the better. It was always insane asylums or hospitals or boarded up schools or murder homes. They were never floating around an old Walmart or a closed-down Costco, and people died in their homes all the time, yet there were precious few stories about their spirits hanging around. Marvin conceded that the prevailing wisdom was that ghosts are the result of an unjust death, but if that were truly the case, then highways would be littered with them. He didn't have data to support it, but he was pretty sure that nearly 100% of all highway fatalities would qualify as unjust, yet he couldn't recall ever having seen a ghostly figure roaming across the interstate. But ghosts were what people wanted to see, and so that's what he gave them. Enter his friend, Flores. Marvin and Flores had been friends since high school and shared a similar skepticism toward the supernatural. They were also both of the opinion that said skepticism could be exploited for financial gains with the right platform and delivery. People would believe anything as long as you could provide a video to back up the claim. That was the easy part, and where Flores came in. The pair had decided at the outset of their channel that Marvin would be the on-screen personality and Flores the off-screen presence that sold a video's narrative. Sometimes it was loud bangs from another room. Other times it was carefully placed fishing line to pull open or close a door. And on the rare occasion, when an unearthly howl or scream out of insidious darkness was required, he managed that too. For the most authentic experience, they agreed it was better if each arrived separately at a location. That way, the scene felt more organic, and there was no risk of accidentally capturing Flores on camera scurrying around in the background. They kept their roles separate, and as far as Marvin was concerned, the channel was better for it. They were a solid team, each committed to making Sinister Cities a success. But tonight, they were taking things to the next level. After so many videos purporting obscure evidence, they decided it was time to up their game and show an actual ghost on camera. The ghost in this case was Flores, but there wasn't a person in the world other than him and Marvin who would ever know that. The plan was stunningly simple. Walk through the forest to the graveyard at night, get some footage of some old broken headstones, and catch a glimpse of a figure in white across the cemetery, at which point Marvin would pretend to be so freaked out he sprinted back to his car. The figure was, of course, Flores, in an all-white costume he had designed that hid his face and emitted an ethereal glow thanks to a subtle LED lights placed beneath it. They did a practice run in Flores' backyard, and the on-camera results were more than convincing. Even they couldn't tell it was a full-grown man pretending to be a 9-year-old girl when natural surroundings were artfully employed. Marvin reached the cemetery and passed his light over the headstones. Channel or no, the place was definitely creepy. Canted tombstones packed a small space outlined by a rotting wooden fence that barely stood. Marvin didn't believe in ghosts, but if he did, this was the sort of place where he thought they might live. He shone his light on several headstones, the eroded epitaphs dating back to the mid-1800s. Marvin smiled. It was time to get some footage. He cleared his throat and readied his camera, turning it on only after he'd perfected his terror face, as he called it. He panned around the cemetery and highlighted several gravestones when he quite accidentally happened upon the headstone of Emma Lou Young. Marvin was genuinely surprised and used his astonishment to reiterate the folklore of Emma's ghost to his viewing audience. He checked his watch. 11:06 p.m. He couldn't have timed it more perfectly if he tried. In less than a minute, Emma's ghost was set to appear. He just hoped Flores was paying attention. Then, on the opposite side of the cemetery, through a scrim of branches and brush, an apparition appeared. Right on time, Flores, Marvin thought. He looked amazing and utterly believable. Not only did he emit an ethereal glow, but he had somehow managed to make much of the costume appear translucent. Marvin readied himself to be frightened and run, but just as his finger hovered over the record button on his camera, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Marvin considered ignoring it, but since he hadn't started filming yet, he decided to fish it out and check the message. He looked at the chat bubble on the lock screen, then frowned when he saw the name. It was Flores. Marvin's frown deepened, then metamorphosed to a creeping fear when he read his message. Bro, not gonna make it on time. Got a flat. Be there in 30. Have to fake time for vid. Marvin could feel the blood drain from his face. He looked at the apparition, which remained partially obscured. He swallowed dryly and forced himself to acknowledge what he knew now to be true. Flores wasn't there. And as the ghostly figure sifted through the trees and across the cemetery toward him, Marvin played his role and turned and ran. It didn't even occur to him to turn on the camera.